Everybody. Good morning, everybody. This is Jeff J. Brown, China Rising Radio, Sinoland in Chiang Mai, China. And man, am I excited to have on the air tonight John Potash, 12 time zones away, halfway around the world in the United States. How are you doing, John?
Good. Good to be with you, Jeff.
Hey, listen, I'm so honored to have you on the show today. And I mean, you have done, in my opinion, you have done some of the best journalism of the 21st century, if its definition is to expose the truth about the lies of empire. Let me tell you all about a little bit about John. John has been featured on C-SPAN's American History TV, A&E, the Reels channel, the Real News Network, and RT television networks. He has also been featured on hundreds of radio programs in the U.S., England, and New Zealand, including Coast to Coast AM. He has published articles in Z Magazine, Covert Action Quarterly, the Baltimore Chronicle, Rock Creek Free Press, and the Free Press. He has worked counseling people with mental health problems and addictions for over 25 years. And in 2015, Potash released his book, Drugs as a Weapon Against Us, the CIA's murderous targeting of SDS, Panthers, Hendrix, Lennon, Cobain, Tupac, and other activists. Potash completed graduate studies at Columbia University. He published his first book in 2007, The FBI War on Tupac Shakur and Black Leaders, U.S. Intelligence's Murderous Targeting of Tupac, MLK, Malcolm, Panthers, Hendrix, Marley, rappers, and the Linked Ethnic Leftists. And that's the book that I have right here. I can show you. I read it. I bought it and I read it, and that will be the focus of our interview. So thank you for being on, John.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Hey, listen, I want to frame your book because I find it to be incredibly important. I can't say enough about your FBI War on Tupac Shakur book. I mean, your years of research and synthesis show just how psychopathic and paranoid the U.S.'s elite rulers are. It is frightening to contemplate how organized and committed these mentally ill people are and the lengths they go to in order to destroy any possible disagreement to their global capitalist stranglehold on the citizens, as well as all levels of institutions, governance, and media. I mean, by the time I finished your book, my head was spinning, but it needed to be spun. I think what makes your book so compelling is all the minute details that you show about the difference, about the literally the extermination of Black activists in particular, and all resistors who start making a difference, regardless of skin color or social status, all over the world. His detailed proof of just how pathological our owners really are allowed me to step back from the nitty gritty, down and dirty of the leaves of the tree, so I could really look at the whole global forest, for this perspective. And so, John, for that, I am deeply, deeply thankful. For all the friends, fans, and followers of China Rising out there, I cannot overestimate how important it is for all free thinkers and freedom lovers to read FBI War on Tupac Shakur, his book, The FBI War on Tupac Shakur. It's not that expensive. But if money is an issue, then ask your local library, school, college, university, or place of worship to get it, so many others can share its wealth of discovery and truth-telling. Failing that, several friends can pool their money to buy it. Using it in a book club would make for fascinating discussion as well. And John, you have the fans out there over the barrel. If they're not a reader, you have the DVD too.
Sure.
Which is even less money, and live stock DVDs. So I'm including on the interview page John's website where to buy his books and DVDs. He's not afraid to give you his email, Skype, even his phone number. So he is readily available to be contacted, and please do. I actually ordered the DVD after the fact. I kind of screwed up because my wife will not read the book, but she will watch the DVD. So anyway, John, are you ready to get started? I'm sorry for that long
Sure.
intro, but
No, it's really, that was very kind of you. Thanks a lot, Jeff.
John, please tell us about yourself and how you ended up getting so involved in exposing the U.S. government's, literally massacre of black and left activists and the destruction of their organizations. There really are no other words to describe what you've written about.
Sure. Well, my grandfather was a socialist lawyer who had defended some Black Panthers in New York, according to my aunt. My grandfather didn't talk about it a lot, but
Wow.
my grandfather did decades and decades of free work for the NAACP. And so he had some famous cases for the NAACP.
Wow.
For example, a black chef off who killed a white cop. And so he did some great work. And according to my aunt, he got off several Black Panthers in New York. He traveled from Baltimore, my hometown, to New York to do that. But so then my father was organized doctors against the Vietnam War. My mother was a lawyer and public defender who joined in on marches against the Vietnam War. So, I did get influenced by my family, but
Wow.
I
Amazing.
just I had my own thoughts. I wasn't very political growing up. I was more sadly into drugs and diverted by drugs. But once I was in college, I started getting more political, and then after college, I really turned on to activism. And after seeing, after getting involved in different activist causes, I also was drug counseling in Baltimore City, doing addictions counseling. And one of my clients said his father was a Black Panther killed by the police. And so I started researching the Black Panthers
Wow.
more. And I was actually starting to write some activist articles at that time. And I started working on a novel, a political novel that kind of became Drugs as Weapons Against Us, the book. But I took a tangent when I was researching the Black Panthers for my political novel. And then when I heard more about Tupac Shakur, I thought, well, no one's going to read a first-time novelist to hear this information, but they would be interested when I found all the information out about Tupac Shakur, that
Yeah.
he was being targeted the same way his Black Panther parents in New York were targeted, and no one was writing about it. So I cold called his New York trial lawyer, Michael Tarif Warren, and told him, all the like political magazines that I was going to try to, freelance this article to, and he had read the same magazines. He liked the same magazines. So he said, yeah, I'll give you a long, interview about this because nobody's writing about this. And he gave me a 2-hour interview, I believe, the first time I talked to him about all this.
Wow.
And I cold called a few other people, wrote that article. At that time, the white left-wing magazines weren't accepting something like that. They believed all the kind of mainstream kind of ideas about Tupac Shakur, that he was really more of just a gangster rapper. They didn't really know much more about him than that. So I had to publish, but I also actually got diverted. There was a magazine called Covert Action Quarterly, based in Washington D.C. and New York, and when I tried to enter their offices, I was kind of diverted out of their offices by a guy, I think, who infiltrated their staff. And he kept me
Wow.
away from really getting that article to the top publishers. And so I could only publish in a local zine that the first article on the targeting of Tupac Shakur in spring of 1995 when he was still alive. But after he died, I got them to publish in 1998, winter of 98-99. They published a long end-noted article about the possible FBI targeting of Tupac Shakur with the latter-day counterintelligence program, which I'll talk about a little more later. And so that's how it all got started. And once I published it,
Wow.
Action Quarterly, which was started by a CIA whistleblower named um, uh, Phil Agee.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It was a great magazine when I was running. It's actually coming. It came out again. His son has put it out again in just web form, but it was on a lot of, you could find it a lot of places in the magazine and hard copy back then, and it won a lot of Project Censored awards back then in the 1990s. And so when I got it in there, people close to Tupac said, "You got to turn this into a book." Because if you don't tell the story, no one else, seems to be willing to. So that's when I started working on the book, as
Wow.
much outside of my regular counseling work.
Yeah, it's John. I mean, it's breathtaking, and my admiration for all of the people that you wrote about, including Tupac, and I have listened to his music, so thanks to you for the first time in my life, and the people that you describe, and it's just absolutely amazing. Well, let's thank you for that. You sound like you were well brought up.
Thank you.
What is so shocking and revealing in your book is that what is going on in the U.S., Britain, and elsewhere. I mean, this is what just slapped me in the face. This is not a case of a racist DA in Los Angeles or some rogue cops in New York or an unethical judge, in Chicago. What you have described in your book, and by the way, it's footnoted with I think 1,000 footnotes. So if you want to research this, but I mean this extermination of black activists and basically anybody who's against the elites. It is a highly coordinated, orchestrated, and planned elimination of any persons or groups who resist these capitalist elites and support economic justice through socialism, especially if they're minorities. And your book clearly draws the nonstop nexus between the CIA, the FBI, the ATF, the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, the IRS got involved, DEA, courts, local police, mafia, white supremacist groups like the KKK, prison wardens, and the media. I mean, I was just gobsmacked when I was reading all this. As you researched and wrote your book, were you surprised how much the total elimination of these targeted people and groups was so purposeful and highly organized? Your thoughts, please.
Yeah, it is incredible how many different groups the U.S. intelligence got involved in this targeting of black activists. It is incredible. It's very sad, very tragic. U.S. intelligence has 14 plus agencies, and I talk in one chapter. I talk about the evolution of U.S. intelligence a little bit. But I talk, 14 plus agencies. We're talking about defense intelligence, naval intelligence, army intelligence, CIA, of course, FBI. I focus much more on the FBI than anyone else, but I do mention parts how, for example, Los Angeles Black Panther leader Geronimo Pratt's legal team found that the CIA also had documents on their targeting of Pratt as well as the FBI, and that they were working with the FBI in targeting Geronimo Pratt. But so it's just an example. And you mentioned ATF, I'll give an example of that. An ATF agent said that the FBI was working with them. He said this in court, that the FBI was working with them. They were offering money, a murder contract to actually the Oakland Hells Angels. You didn't even mention, of course, but I don't expect you to.
I forgot the Hells Angels.
Yeah, I mean, how could you? I mean, it's so many different groups. And so they want to put these other groups in between them and the actual murder in order for people not to find out who was really behind the murder. Okay, so they put a murder contract on the National Black Panther Minister of Information, Eldridge Cleaver, all right, through the Hells Angels. They also put that murder contract on Cesar Chavez, who was the migrant farm workers organizer who started that Great Boycott back in, I think it was the 70s, if you might remember that, I don't know.
Yeah.
But anyway, so this is the way they do things. They try to get some distance between them and the actual, assassination of these, black leaders. They don't want to, they don't want to be found out. So with Martin Luther King, for example, they actually, according to the top investigator of Martin Luther King, William Pepper, who was a friend of King's before he died, he was, he's now an Oxford attorney. He's an attorney who teaches human rights classes at Oxford University in England, and so Pepper wrote 2 incredible books, Act of State and Orders to Kill, about the assassination of Martin Luther King, and he found that the FBI and CIA agents met with the top New York crime boss family leaders, and offered them $1 million to take out Martin Luther King, to assassinate Martin Luther King, and they actually rejected that offer. But the top mafia, kingpin in the Louisiana and area, also lorded over Texas and some other other states. Carlos Marcello took that offer, and Marcello apparently then recontracted out to a smaller level mafia in Memphis, in Tennessee, to carry out, to help U.S. intelligence carry out the assassination of Martin Luther King. So I have a chapter on that, consolidating, all that Pepper found in his book about the assassination of Martin Luther King. Now, the Shakurs were a very interesting window for me into the assassination of many of these, great black leaders. The Shakurs were excellent grassroots activists, black activists, and so the purpose of my using Tupac Shakur and his his Shakur family is the fact that he became a worldwide celebrity, in his short 25 years of life, because he was incredibly talented, incredibly bright, very appealing. He's a movie star. He was a music star and all that, and so he's loved worldwide. So I thought through him, people will start to learn about the history of all these great black leaders over the course of the last 5 or 6 decades, and the real history of them, both in their great activist organizing, along with the way U.S. intelligence murdered them, assassinated a lot of these great leaders. And so this was my goal with this book, and to shape it through the Shakur family, because and people have told me that they're, like I have a black radio host here at Pacifica Radio in Washington, D.C., who I'm friends with, and he's a great, activist himself, but he says he couldn't get his daughter to read, some real good books on like Martin Luther King or the Black Panthers until he gave her my book. She's an adult, she's in her 20s or so, and when he gave her my book, she read that immediately. And so that's, that's the entree, I believe. And so, but it's, the Shakurs are important to talk about anyway. So I'm so glad to talk about them, because they were amazing. They started with the father of these Black Panther leaders. His name was Saladin Abba Shakur, and he was a intimate of first he was part of actually Marcus Garvey's group, the United Negro Improvement Association, and who Malcolm X's father, was part of. And then he became a close associate of Malcolm X's in within the inner circle of Malcolm X before Malcolm X was assassinated in New York. And so Saladin Abba Shakur lived in New York, and he adopted some kids, but he also had his own biological sons, Lumumba Shakur and Zaid Shakur. And so Lumumba Shakur became the leader of the Harlem Black Panthers, and Zaid Shakur became one of the leaders of the Bronx Black Panthers. And so they joined Malcolm X's group before Malcolm X was assassinated. But they had a very short time in Malcolm X's group, but they were, of course, recognized as black leaders for being in Malcolm X's group by the California Black Panthers, Huey Newton and Bobby Seale, who started the Black Panthers in Oakland in 1966. And, and so there it began. And, of course, Afeni Shakur was quickly recognized as a brilliant young woman, and Lumumba Shakur married her. And but because of different circumstances while they were in prison, they ended up getting divorced. and Phineas Shakur had slept with another Panther when she was out of jail, while Lumumba was in jail, and so she got pregnant with Tupac while she was out of jail, and then gave birth to him like within months of helping get herself out of jail. And she defended herself in court. It was considered as the reason that the Black Panther 21 got off in court. Got off of all charges in court. It's pretty amazing. So, which was called the longest trial in New York history at that time, actually. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, it's pretty amazing that the U.S. intelligence brought to the table to target them. And yes, it involved the CIA. It involved, with Huey Newton, involved the IRS, as you mentioned. And the FBI was found by different, investigators who interviewed different FBI agents that they'd infiltrated the Ku Klux Klan, but did nothing to stop their actions. Mm-hmm. And they were at, one particular biography of an FBI agent. He said he was at virtually every major KKK conflagration, meaning he was just there. And what was he doing? Why didn't he stop anything? Why didn't he arrest anyone?
Taking notes. This is how you do it,
right? Or making sure that it worked properly.
Yeah, exactly.
Too, so that's the question. And some FBI agents were undercover within the KKK during the Atlanta child murders, and one blew the whistle. And there was a movie. There was actually a Spin magazine series of articles done about this whistleblower in the Georgia Bureau of Investigation that infiltrated the KKK and described all the evidence that the KKK was behind the Atlanta child murders of the 1980s. Dozens and dozens of black kids were killed. And then they pretended like they found the killer. It was a black DJ in the area. He was doing all the killing, they said. But the murders continued after that, but the press hid the continuation of the murders, is what I've heard about that. And it's just terrible how that stuff's happening.
We're laughing, but it's catharsis, because
it's so tragic.
If you, I just don't even know how to cope with all of this.
It's laughable the way they do what they do, because it's so blatant and so horrible. But at the same time, of course, tragic for the black community.
Well, for the United
tragic
States
for
of America.
All of us. It's tragic for the United States of America. It's tragic because anyone who's got a soul loved Martin Luther King and loved a lot of these black leaders, and they could have been the great leaders of our country, because Robert F. Kennedy actually asked Martin Luther King to be his running mate.
Mm-hmm.
If I win the nomination, to be my running mate for my vice president, for if I win if I run for the presidency, make it out of the general election, make it out of the primaries. And so he was expected to make it out of the primaries. Martin Luther King could have been our vice president, our president, way before Obama, because of the foresight and lack of prejudice by that time of Robert F. Kennedy. Mm-hmm. And so it's so sad that we all all ethnic groups lost these great leaders, not just the black community.
Well, and another thing that I also was really impressed with is that these black leaders who have been massacred and illegally, they're basically prisoners of conscience, have been locked up for years and years and years and years, lives ruined, families ruined, but they also are they mention the Latinos and Native Americans. So they pay their respects to all the Latinos and the Native Americans that have been exterminated too. Well, listen, let's a definite, and I actually have written a lot about genocide in my books. A definition of genocide is the organized extermination of a group of people based on their race, politics, religion, ethnicity, or geographical location, which the latter is often called ethnic cleansing, like what the Israelis do daily in Palestine. Based on this definition, do you think the U.S. government has committed genocide on black, native, and left activists? Why or why not?
Oh, definitely. And so the list goes on. Now, mainstream media overlaps with these oligarchs, other multinational corporations, and that's part of the way they control our information. Ben Bagdickian, the former head of University of California Berkeley School of Journalism, wrote about this in the Media Monopoly, how there's basically 6 corporations that control 90 plus percent of our information in the United States. And these corporations overlap, share boards of directors with oil companies, pharmaceuticals, banks, insurance companies, etc., and defense industry, of course, in a big way. And so they have to do their bidding by corporate law, for shareholders, stocks, and stuff like that. So anyway, that's part of the way it works. But so, they went and murdered, committed genocide. I mean, basically, I cover the cutting off of the heads of these great groups. They kill off the leaders, and they leave the rest just a little bit leaderless and having a harder time, knowing what direction to go in when they kill off so many of the leaders. So, I show all the evidence that they were behind. Obviously, I mentioned the murder, the assassination of Martin Luther King, the assassination of Malcolm X, the assassination of the Los Angeles Black Panther first leaders of John Huggins and Bunchy Carter, assassination of the Chicago Black Panther leader Fred Hampton. They killed just loads of Los Angeles Black Panther leaders and imprisoned who they didn't kill for many years, neutralizing them. And then they eventually killed, there's 2, the co-founder of the National Black Panthers, Huey Newton. And so this is genocide. Yes. I mentioned the Atlanta child murders, but there's more than that. I kept it and mostly covering the leaders because there was just not enough room. It would have been a much larger book, and a lot of people won't read a much larger book when I cover all of what I believe is the genocide. But I hint to a good bit of it, and I do think that's what it is. And when it comes to the Latino community, I do talk a bit about the way they targeted Latin America. You had mentioned before how a lot of the black leaders pay respect to Latino leaders and Native Americans. And so the American Indian movement said that they learned from the Black Panthers and copied the way they organized. And the person that founded the Young Lords, which was the Latino version of the Black Panthers, Jose Cha-Cha Jimenez actually followed Bobby Seale through his organizing and his work to learn from him for a month. But Bobby Seale allowed Jose Cha-Cha Jimenez to come and follow him and learn how he did what he did, and to do his own thing with Latinos, and which spread to dozens of cities, the Young Lords organizing. And so I learned, I took community organizing classes in grad school and learned a lot about community organizing, and some a number of community organizers considered the Black Panthers some of the top community organizers in the country. And that's really what they were. They were community organizers that armed themselves with guns just for self-defense from the incredible police brutality that was out there in the 1960s, and obviously hasn't stopped today.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, your book, for those of you who are not big readers, the whole book is only 196 pages long. Actually, 1/4 of the book is all basically footnotes. So if you get a nice 200-page a quick read in less than 200 pages, and then if you want to go back to all the research, he's got just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of references. Well, listen, this, again, I want to try to look at the big picture, and the list of, police state. I mean, these are fascist operations is endless. I mean, you discuss bribery, extortion, blackmail, murder, assassinations, torture, terrorism, false flags, importing and pushing cocaine and heroin sales into poor/minority neighborhoods, fomenting gang wars, illegal imprisonment, fake and planted evidence, evidence supporting the target is ignored or suppressed, rigged kangaroo court trials, psyops, which is basically fake news in the media, and black ops like forged letters, crimes and conspiracies fabricated out of thin air, entrapment, agents infiltrating families, friends, businesses, and legal teams, CIA/FBI fronted companies, CIA agents working at all levels of business and media, with big business piling on to provide support with InfraGard. Your book showed me that the United States is not a liberal democracy with a free press, but a totalitarian regime that crushes any and all dissent, or as Sheldon Wolin called it, inverted totalitarianism. I mean, we're obviously, we grew up very, privileged, white, middle class, et cetera. But do you agree, especially for those who are the targets?
Yes, and this all appeared to start in the if you could find an actual start to it, but you could say it started in the early 19 teens. This kind of genocide against ethnic groups. The oligarchs. I like to call the elite the oligarchs. I know the elite is a sociological term. Sociology uses that for the wealthiest, but I call them the oligarchs, and I call them the racist oligarchs because they're incredibly prejudiced. So you got the eugenics movement starting in the 19 teens, which I get more into in my next book, but it's worth talking about a little bit here. It's basically the J.P. Morgan family, the Rockefeller family, the Carnegies, the Harrimans, and maybe one or two other families, all involved in funding this eugenics movement that had laws passed in the majority of the states of our country in the 19 teens, deeming, eugenics laws were deeming loads, like virtually all ethnic groups, inferior, like genetically inferior by different percentages. Now, blacks, they said like 90% had inferior genetics, and Jews were about 50%. Catholics were about 50%, inferior genetically. They were.
I shouldn't be laughing, but it's just like something out of a Peter Sellers movie. It
is mind-boggling, isn't it? And a lot of this comes from a guy named Edwin Black's book, War Against the Weak, which is probably the best documentation about the eugenics movement. And it's been translated into loads of different languages. It's got incredible documentation of its references. And basically, so these families, funded this, and it went on for decades until World War II, when they had funded, when most European countries wouldn't accept the funding of these eugenics, folks. But only Germany, which was so devastated by World War I, they're the only, they were so devastated that they took money from anywhere because they needed it. And so the Nazi movement was really funded by the eugenics folks of the United States. There was some collaboration with the, aristocrats from England, but, they put tons of money into the Nazis, the philosophy. It was basically eugenics philosophy, and tons of money to their rise. And sadly enough, I know you mentioned Israel and Zionism. Zionism was a very small percentage of Jews in the United States. Edwin Black estimated that it was about 2% of the Jewish community actually considered themselves Zionist in the early 1900s. But they put so much money into these groups that pretended like Zionism was popular amongst all Jews, and they got an agreement, something called one of Edwin Black's books was the Transfer Agreement, which was about how worldwide protests, partly Jews, partly labor, partly everyone who was just against what was going on in Germany, almost toppled Hitler. But they pretended like these, the wealthiest of the Jews collaborated with the oligarchs of the eugenics movement, and had these groups that they pretended were national Jewish groups, but they're really just a few wealthy families and like, you know, front groups pretty much that said we're getting out of this protest and this boycott of Germany. And so it kind of crumbled the boycott at a time when Hitler was about to fall and the Nazis were about to fall because the boycott was working against them. And part of that agreement that led to the stopping the boycott was the transfer agreement was sending a lot of Jews to Israel and forming this new country, you know, of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a real shame that it got perverted that way. And Israel's just been a puppet of U.S. interests ever since to control the oil regions. And, you know, I think good researchers have shown not Netanyahu was CIA from day one.
Yeah.
And any leader that tried to turn against that Israeli policy against the Palestinians is assassinated. And then those are intelligence plot, assassinations. So that's the way I see it. And it's just terrible. It's terrible what's going on there. But I think a lot, majority of Jews actually are changing and are actually saying we're pro-Palestinian rights. You know, Noam Chomsky, Howard Zinn, and lots of other Jewish intellectual leaders were actually for Palestinian rights and against what Israel is doing. So, but in terms of the totalitarianism here, with it's incredible what they're doing to the 99% in general, and the way they do it though is so devious in the sense that first thing, anti-war activists in 1971 broke into the FBI office and found stole all the papers in that FBI office in Media, Pennsylvania, and exposed it, and so they made tons of copies of these documents to find out that it was called the Counterintelligence Program, was their targeting of leftists in general, but particularly brutally against black leftists and murderously against black leftists, obviously. So they had it all in writing, all these, different tactics that you mentioned in your question. And so I just laid a lot of these tactics out in my book, but they were there, in their own, the FBI's own writing, about own documents. Now the mainstream media covered it a little bit, but they basically covered it up a lot. It took it took like just smaller presses to get out more of the information, and books from well-meaning activist scholars such as Ward Churchill and Richard Vanderwall, who wrote the COINTELPRO papers, that took a lot of those papers and showed copies of them, showed the way they targeted the Native, the American Indian movement, the way they targeted the Young Lords, the way they targeted SDS and the students, which was the white Students for Democratic Society, the largest anti-war movement, and of course, in the biggest way, the way they targeted the Black Panthers, the Revolutionary Action Movement, which was another great black activist group, the Republic of New Africa, which was started by Tupac's stepfather, Mutulu Shakur, and some other great black activists. The Black Liberation Army, which was what the Black Panthers became when they were forced underground and needed to really, use guns more to defend themselves. And Tupac's uncle Zaid Shakur was one of the founding members of the Black Liberation Army. And of course, Assata Shakur was very close with Zaid Shakur. She didn't found the Black Liberation Army, but when she was forced to go underground because she was scared for her life, she had to become part of them. And now she's a political refugee in Cuba.
In Cuba, yeah.
Yeah. So
I read about her.
Yeah, that's Tupac's aunt. And so that's just basically the way it's gone, and a lot of these FBI documents obviously show that targeting, but they found later CIA documents that also the way the CIA joined in on this targeting. It's an incredible totalitarian situation, but it's incredibly well masked too by the collaborating mainstream media, sadly enough.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Two quick points. The families that you mentioned, the billionaire families that you mentioned that started the eugenics movement, those were the families that started the CIA, which you've written about.
Yes. Yes.
And then I'll just want to point out that not only did Hitler get the eugenics program from the West, Hitler also got his concentration camp concept from the United States with their Indian reservations. So
Makes
uh,
sense.
Hitler is all American.
Yeah.
All right. Let me see. Reading your book showed me how fearful and insecure America's, and I will quit using elites thanks to you. I'll,
No worries.
I'll start saying oligarchs really are. They are so afraid of any dissent. I mean, they just kill anyone who stands up for the little guy, or they lock them away in prison for long prison terms to shut them up. I mean, they must be incredibly afraid. What do you think?
Yeah. I guess, it's, I mean, they just see, I mean, I think, blacks have done great organizing, and there's so much black history we don't know about. They've had so many incredible inventions. They've done so many things. There's so much about black history that I've learned about slowly but surely, and I still learn about every day. Like, for example, there's a new show on HBO called The Watchmen, and they happen to, talk about Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma, in there. And so they had an incredible, thriving black community with great financial, you know, despite all the institutional racism, they were doing fantastically for themselves there in Oklahoma before white mobs just burned it all down, burned the black community down, and killed thousands of blacks. I mean, and even had planes dropping bombs on black homes. It was just in black institutions. It was just horrible. Anyway, so there's so much hidden history there, and so there's great black, grassroots movements like as I mentioned before, the Revolutionary Action Movement, but also the New African People's Organization is a great activist group that has, was founded by former Black Panthers and former members of the Republic of New Africa, and they're still around today. But they were doing great work. New African Panthers was Tupac's young adult section of that group, and I just think that they're scared that blacks are gonna gain the right to a real democracy. They are gonna organize to a point where they have great. They're going to be a role model for socialism, for one thing, because they were devout socialists, the Black Panthers, and they're going to show a different economic model in their, free breakfast programs and free medical programs, free, political education classes, all kinds of things like that. They were going to show a different way, a socialist kind of economic model, a different form of organizing to all these other ethnic groups, which they did. And that's why they were such a threat. That's why J. Edgar Hoover, the director of the FBI, called them the top threat in the country. Because he represented, U.S. intelligence represented the wealthiest oligarchs that are just about hyper-capitalism. Not just regular capitalism, hyper-capitalism with monopolies where, 99% are struggling to make it, struggling to pay off debt, struggling with incredible health insurance costs, college costs, while the 1% or less than 1%, really the 0.01%, really have the vast majority of wealth in this country, and they're trying to increase that and make themselves wealthier and wealthier, while the 99% are getting less and less. And that's what that's the threat of these black activists, I think.
Wow. Well, and I agree with you. I absolutely agree with you. There are so many things we could discuss about your book. I mean, we could have an interview on Tupac. We could have the guy was obviously had an IQ of 240 and was just brilliant. And all these people are brilliant and talented. It's just amazing. But there was one thing that you kept mentioning that stuck out, and I think it kind of just illustrates how programmed and organized and institutionalized the genocide of Black activists, especially, but just about anybody who threatens or gains enough of a following to threaten the oligarchs that they take them out. Either by killing them or framing them to put them in jail. And one of those is called timed threats. Please tell us about this phenomenon.
Sure. Well, that's, I call it the threat timing tactic or the anniversary timing tactic. Since this book centers on Tupac Shakur, I will now talk a little more about him in particular. But the threat timing tactic, I got the idea for it when I read William Pepper's book on, I think it was Orders to Kill, he wrote about it in, where when the exact year anniversary of Martin Luther King officially stating his opposition to the Vietnam War in a famous Riverside church speech, he officially came out as being against the Vietnam War. When the exact year anniversary of that famous speech, he was assassinated. And William Pepper said, he wonders if it's just a coincidence or if that was purposeful. Now, I found so many more anniversary timing tactics in when I was researching the Black Panthers and Tupac Shakur and finding out about another famous Black leader, Patrice Lumumba, and Laurent Kabila, who was his sidekick in the Congo, and that I mentioned them in my book because I don't think it's just a coincidence. I think it's a subconscious. It's trying to implant in all of us the subconscious idea that if you go against our wishes, this is what's going to happen to you. It's a psychological tactic. Because our subconscious, I'm a counselor, and I, learn a lot about the subconscious as a counselor, and been counseling for over 3 decades now. And yes, a lot happens in our subconscious that we don't realize consciously. But whether it's consciously or subconsciously, we pick a lot more up, subconsciously that yes, if you go against this, that you could die. And so when the 3-year anniversary of Huey Newton's death, for example, Huey Newton, remember, was the co-founder of the Black Panthers nationally, and Tupac was consulting with Huey Newton in Huey Newton's last year of life because Tupac was heading the New African Panthers at that time. They were active in 8 to 10 cities around the country. They were trying to replicate the Black Panthers. They were about the same ages as the Black Panthers when they had first started. And so Tupac was consulting regularly with Huey Newton, and he was also consulting with his godfather, Geronimo Pratt, who was the Los Angeles Black Panther leader who was imprisoned at that time, but Tupac was visiting him in prison and consulting with him about leading the New African Panthers. Then Tupac left that New African Panther leadership, where he was the leader for about a year, and decided to get into music because he had a chance to tour with a Grammy-nominated group called the Digital Underground and tour worldwide with them. He thought he could possibly use rap as a better vehicle for his activism than just regular organizing and with the New African Panthers. And so 3 years after the exact 3-year anniversary of Huey Newton's murder, now Huey Newton was murdered on the exact year anniversary that he came out with the fact that he was ending the East Coast versus West Coast rift, and holding a press conference saying, "I'm not going to leave jail until Geronimo Pratt's released from jail." And originally, the FBI's counterintelligence program, it created a great rift between Huey Newton and Geronimo Pratt, and Huey Newton and a number of other Black Panther leaders. But he was ending that rift and reuniting a lot of different Black Panther leaders. And with that, so the year anniversary of him calling that press conference and saying he wouldn't leave jail until Pratt's let out of jail, but the next day Pratt convinced him to leave jail and help him from the outside. Huey Newton's assassinated, And then the 3-year anniversary of Huey Newton being assassinated, there is a Marin festival where Tupac's the honorary guest of Marin's the kind of annual fest, and at that fest Tupac was shot at and then beaten, and just barely survived by crawling under a police car to not get beaten to death by a mob. And it showed all the signs of an FBI coordinated attack, a long coordinated FBI attack. But they failed. It failed to kill him, but it was very close to killing him. And this was under police watch. And so then later in Tupac, 2 years later or so, Tupac is shot in New York recording studio lobby, and they put a bullet in him to get him on the ground, and then 2 bullets in the back of his skull that went out the front of his skull and barely missed his brain. It was just miraculous they survived. It's obviously an assassination attempt. The police called it a botched robbery in the most well-lit area in the world at night, Times Square, and so it's on police surveillance. It's on the surveillance camera for the lobby recording. It was at a recording studio lobby, and the guy who worked, guard who worked there said, "Here's the videotape. Here's the tapes from the of the shooters." And the police took it and closed the case and failed to see. Oh, here's the shooters. Let's look for him. They just closed the case. Anyway, at that incident, a witness named Randy Stretch Walker, who was a friend of Tupac's, talked about what happened there. But exact year anniversary of that incident, he was murdered, and he was a witness to some of these people that did the shooting. And then after Tupac was murdered, was assassinated on the night of a Mike Tyson fight. 6 months later, at the next Mike Tyson fight, Biggie Smalls was murdered. And I believe that was, Biggie was starting to speak out and saying he didn't have any beef with Tupac, and he didn't think it was an East Coast, West Coast thing, but he was murdered. And I argue that was part of to make it look like it was an East Coast, West Coast beef between 2 rappers. But I argue that it was more of again, the threat timing tactic, that if you speak out against what they want you to speak out against, if you try to get into any kind of activism or don't toe the line, this is what can happen to you. And so, it goes on from there with Patrice Lumumba, when I think it was the 40th or 50th year anniversary of Patrice Lumumba's assassination by the CIA. Laurent Kabila, his sidekick, who had become a leader, the head of the Congo, was then assassinated himself.
On that anniversary. On that anniversary, yeah. And also the U.S. government operation, the Oklahoma City. By the way, I'm from Oklahoma, so I know all about the Tulsa, the black communities. Yeah. But the anniversary, the Oklahoma City bombing happened exactly 1 year after the Branch Davidian, the same date.
Interesting.
As of the Branch Davidian, which was also, of course, an American government operation to destroy dissenters. Also, 9/11 happened on an anniversary. I can't remember what it was, but 9/11.
Chile, toppling Salvador Allende.
Yeah.
September 11th, 1973. Yeah.
Unbelievable. Let's try to end this on a positive note.
Yeah. Well,
the list of we've got to get it out. So
yeah. No, I'll just say, look, Tupac in his short life inspired millions worldwide to do what he did, which is turn on to activism. And so that itself is positive. The Black Panthers, the truth about them is finally coming out as these incredible community organizers, and they're inspiring tons of people. But yeah, I know you. I'm sorry, you wanted to ask about the people that are still alive.
Yeah. The list of murdered and illegally imprisoned activists in your book is so long. I mean, it's so sobering to consider. There are stories of incredible courage. And fearless resistance are remarkable. I mean, not to mention their amazing creativity, intelligence, and art. I mean, I'm going to start listening to rap now, and I want to get Tupac's book of poetry. So many were slain by their government for supporting the 99%, and so many others' lives were destroyed, locked up in prison. For example, Mumia Abu-Jamal is still illegally locked up as a prisoner of conscience in spite of massive public support from around the world. Your book was last reprinted in 2015. Since then, is there any good news about the ones who were not massacred?
Yeah, well, Mumia, they found 2 boxes of hidden evidence that the prosecutor kept from the Mumia Abu-Jamal's defense attorneys. And so it looks like Mumia is going to get a new trial. We're still waiting to see. There's a new judge on the case that ruled somewhat in Mumia's favor. That looks like he'll get a new trial. I'm just not sure when. So that's good news. In terms of some of the Black Panthers that have gotten out of jail after decades, Baltimore Black Panther leader Eddie Conway got out of jail and is doing great work here in Baltimore, my hometown, and his hometown, with the Real News Network, which is a great media group out of Baltimore. And so that's really nice. I've been on there twice now, and it's been good. Bronx Black Panther leader Sekou Odinga, whose wife was head of Tupac's new record label that he just started right before he died, called Euthanasia. Bronx Black Panther leader Shakur Odinga got out of jail just sometime in the last 5 years and is doing good work. And his former wife, Yasmin Fula, is still doing good work herself, though they lost their son, who was in Tupac's backup group, and his name was Yafu Fula, and he was murdered. He was the top witness to Tupac's murder and thought he could identify the killer, and he was murdered within a few months of Tupac's assassination. But Kathleen Cleaver was the national spokesperson for the Black Panther Party, and she's still teaching law now. She was a visiting professor at Yale University just in the last 5 years. Former gang leader turned socialist activist Sonika Shakur. His original name was Monster Cody Scott. He wrote a New York Times bestseller called Monster. He's out of jail again and getting back into activism and writing more books. He's a great writer. Mutulu Shakur should be out of jail. He should have been released, but they're keeping him in jail. It's Tupac's stepfather, but he's still alive and still trying to get the word out. And there's Chicago based Fred Hampton Jr., whose father was, head of the Chicago Black Panthers. Fred Hampton Jr. is doing great work. He started a group called the Prisoners of Conscience Committee, and they're a national group doing great activist work, grassroots activist work. Harry Belafonte, who I talked about him a little bit in my book, is still alive at 92 years old. It's amazing, and he's still inspiring tons of people. He inspired Danny Glover. Danny Glover is a great. He was, with Mel Gibson in some of his famous movies they did together. They did 3 movies together. I forgot their names of them, but Glover's great actor and big time actor who is doing great activist work here. He's stumped for Bernie Sanders a number of times. He's done a lot of grassroots work. Also, Tupac's estate should be releasing a new Tupac CD sometime in the next year or two, I hear.
I'll buy it.
And so
Tupac fan.
Yeah, and so Black Panther leader, national co-founder Bobby Seale is still doing good work and inspiring people too. He's still alive and inspiring people.
Wow. And Asada Shakur is still in Cuba. They haven't gotten to her yet, so
right.
She's a symbol of escaping the clutches of the oligarchs.
Exactly.
Your work is just absolutely amazing. By the way, before we sign out, you in your book, in the back, after all of the
Had
the
notes.
100 pages of footnotes. There's a poem by Fred Hampton Jr., and it's so good, and I loved it so much. I asked you, I don't know how to contact Mr. Hampton, and so I asked you if you thought he would mind. And so at the end of the article for John's interview on China Rising Radio Sinoland, I transcribed it from the book and
That's
included
nice.
it in the at the end to kind of celebrate, because it's just a beautiful and powerful, voice against the oligarchs. So anyway, you're a busy guy. You're helping people get off drugs and get their lives in order. You've got a family to take care of. What other projects do you have in the pipeline?
Well, I'm now working on a political novel, and yeah, I'm getting there with that, and probably create some kind of movie with that too. But yeah, it's my next project, and it's kind of a nonfiction and fiction in one, but it's mostly it tries to stay humorous and entertaining throughout. So a little different, little spin on it all.
Good. I want
Thanks.
to write fiction too. So I'm going to get my fourth book out on China and the evils of Western Empire, and then I want to do a fiction book
Great.
too. Maybe we can give each other advice.
Sure. Yeah. Good
Hey,
luck. That's great, Jeff.
hey, listen, you have been a terrific guest. I have read your second book also, and maybe I can get you back on the air to talk,
Be
because it's
great.
a completely different spin. I mean, it's just it's another mind-boggling, amazing book that you just cannot conceive what is going on in our country. But anyway, thank you so much for being on. I will get this out in the
Pleasure,
next
Jeff.
couple of days, and hopefully we can both blast it across the planet Earth and help some of these people. And maybe you can also help me introduce me to some of your contacts, and I'd love to have them on the show as in the months ahead.
Great. Thanks a lot, Jeff.
All
Talk to
right.
you soon.
Listen, talk to you later, John. Bye bye. We'll stay in
Okay.
touch.
Sure
Bye
thing.
bye. Bye
Bye,
bye.
Jeff.